The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Eliza Jenkins' pale skin as she stood on the crude wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that chafed against her flesh. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a wild mustang trying to break free from its pen. She had never imagined that her journey west would end like this, being auctioned off like cattle to the highest bidder in a dusty frontier town. The year was 1875, and the Arizona Territory was still untamed, lawless and dangerous, especially for a woman alone. 3 weeks ago, Eliza had been traveling with a wagon train from St. Louis, seeking a new beginning after her parents' deaths left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The Comanche raid had changed everything. Most of the travelers were killed. She was one of the few survivors taken captive, only to be sold to white outlaws who saw an opportunity to make money off a pretty face. Next up, we got ourselves a real fine specimen, city-bred but healthy. Look at that golden hair, gents. Imagine what she could do for you after those long, lonely nights on the range. The auctioneer bellowed, yanking Eliza forward. She stumbled, her legs weak from dehydration and fear. Men jeered and called out crude suggestions. Eliza kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, trying to preserve what little dignity she had left. She wondered if death might be kinder than what awaited her. $20, someone shouted from the crowd. 25, called another. The bids climbed slowly, each increase making Eliza's stomach twist tighter. She was worth so little to these men, yet they would take everything from her. $50. A voice rose above the others, deep and commanding. The crowd parted, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders and a face partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. His duster coat was dusty from the trail, but even at a distance, Eliza could see that his clothes were of better quality than most of the rabble gathered around the auction block. $50 going once. The auctioneer called out, his voice tinged with excitement at the high bid. 60, challenged a burly, bearded man at the front of the crowd. $100, the stranger countered without hesitation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was more than most of them made in 2 months. Well, I'll be. The auctioneer grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. $100 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. The stranger strode forward, each step purposeful and controlled. As he approached, Eliza could see him more clearly, a face weathered by sun and wind, eyes the color of a storm-laden sky, and a mouth set in a grim line. He looked to be in his early 30s, with a few strands of silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He handed the money to the auctioneer, who counted it eagerly before nodding his approval. The stranger turned to Eliza then, those storm-gray eyes assessing her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly. "Come along," he said, his voice softer than she expected. When she didn't move immediately, he reached up and, in one swift movement, cut the rope binding her wrists. The sudden release made her sway on her feet, lightheaded from standing in the sun for hours. The man's hand shot out to steady her, strong fingers gripping her elbow. "You'll rest now," he said quietly, for her ears alone. Eliza didn't know why, but something in those simple words, a promise of respite, made tears spring to her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to show weakness. He led her through the crowd, his body positioned protectively between her and the leering men. At the edge of the town square stood a handsome chestnut gelding, its coat gleaming even in the dusty surroundings. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," Eliza answered, her voice raspy from thirst. He offered her a canteen. "Drink slowly." The water was warm but clean, and it took all her willpower not to gulp it down. When she'd had enough, he took it back and mounted the horse with practiced ease, then extended his hand to her. Eliza hesitated. She had no idea who this man was or what he intended to do with her. But staying in this town meant certain doom. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, seeming to read her thoughts. "My ranch is half a day's ride from here. You'll have food, clean clothes, and a safe place to sleep. Nothing more will be asked of you tonight. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was the only one she had. Eliza took his hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him. "Hold on," he instructed as he turned the horse toward the road leading out of town. Reluctantly, Eliza placed her hands lightly on his sides. "You'll fall off that way," he said with a hint of amusement in his voice. "I don't bite, miss." Swallowing her pride, she wrapped her arms around his solid torso as the horse broke into a trot, then a canter, carrying them away from the hellish town and into the vast, open country beyond. "I'm Darius Everett," he said over his shoulder as they rode. "And you are?" "Eliza Jenkins," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Well, Miss Jenkins, welcome to the Arizona Territory, though I expect this isn't quite the welcome you had in mind." No, it certainly wasn't. But as the distance grew between her and that auction block, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. They rode in silence for hours, the landscape changing from scrubby desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, bathing everything in a golden glow that softened the harsh terrain. "There it is," Darius said eventually, pointing toward a valley where a cluster of buildings nestled beside a creek lined with cottonwoods. Everett Ranch. It was larger than Eliza had expected. A substantial main house built of wood and stone stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they approached, Eliza could see cattle grazing in the distance. "You live here alone?" she asked, finding her voice again. "No, I have ranch hands, 8 of them, and Mrs. Abernathy, who keeps house and cooks. She has a cabin behind the main house." They rode into the yard, and almost immediately, a gray-haired woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression changed from welcome to surprise when she spotted Eliza. Darius dismounted and helped Eliza down, her legs nearly buckling after the long ride. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then turned to the older woman. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Jenkins. She'll be staying with us for a while. She's had a difficult journey and needs rest, food, and clean clothes." The housekeeper's sharp eyes took in Eliza's disheveled appearance, the dirt on her torn dress, the bruises on her arms. Understanding dawned in her gaze. "Of course, Mr. Everett." "Come with me, dear," she said, her voice kind as she extended her hand to Eliza. "I'll draw you a bath and find you something suitable to wear." Eliza looked uncertainly at Darius, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on, I'll see to the horse and join you for supper in an hour." With no better option, Eliza followed Mrs. Abernathy into the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, well-crafted furniture, polished wooden floors covered with woven rugs, and shelves lined with books. It spoke of prosperity and permanence, 2 things Eliza had not known for some time. The bath was heavenly hot water scented with lavender and soap that didn't sting her cracked skin. Mrs. Abernathy had provided a simple but clean dress that was only slightly too large, and had tactfully left Eliza alone to wash and dress herself. Once clean and clothed, with her damp hair combed and braided, Eliza felt more human than she had in weeks. She ventured out of the bathing room to find Mrs. Abernathy waiting for her. "Much better," the older woman said with approval. "Come, let me show you to the dining room. Mr. Everett will be in shortly." The dining room was warm and inviting, with a polished oak table set for 3. Through the window, Eliza could see the last rays of sunlight disappearing behind the mountains. "Mrs. Abernathy," she began hesitantly, "may I ask?" "What sort of man is Mr. Everett?" The housekeeper paused in her arrangement of the cutlery. "He's a good man, Miss Jenkins, fair and honest. He works harder than any of his men and treats everyone with respect." She gave Eliza a meaningful look. "If that's what you're worried about." Before Eliza could respond, the door opened and Darius entered, his hair damp and his face freshly shaved. He had changed into clean clothes, a white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. "Miss Jenkins," he said with a slight nod, "I trust you're feeling better." "Yes, thank you," Eliza replied. acutely aware of how vulnerable her position was despite his apparent kindness. They sat down to a meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Eliza tried to eat slowly and with decorum, though she was ravenous after days of meager provisions. "Tomorrow, when you're rested, we can discuss your situation," Darius said after they had eaten in relative silence for a while. "Where you were headed, if you have family who might be looking for you." The mention of family made Eliza's throat tighten. "I don't have anyone," she admitted. "My parents died of influenza last winter. I was traveling west to take a position as a schoolteacher in California." "I see." Darius's expression remained neutral. "And the wagon train you were with, attacked 3 weeks ago near the New Mexico border. I was taken." She couldn't bring herself to elaborate further. A muscle in Darius's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry that happened to you. This territory can be unforgiving." After supper, Mrs. Abernathy showed Eliza to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor of the house. "Mr. Everett's room is down the hall and mine is off the kitchen," she explained. "If you need anything during the night, don't hesitate to call." Left alone, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the clean quilt. For the first time in weeks, she was clean, fed, and safe at least for the moment. Yet questions whirled in her mind. Why had Darius Everett, a man she'd never met, paid so much money for her? What did he expect in return? And what would become of her now that her plans for California lay in ruins? Too exhausted to ponder these questions further, Eliza lay down and was asleep almost instantly. She woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't recognize. For a moment, panic seized her until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was at Everett Ranch, saved from the auction block by a stranger with storm-gray eyes. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Abernathy's entrance with a tray of breakfast and a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins. I've brought you some breakfast and a few things to wear." "They belonged to Mr. Everett's sister when she visited last summer. She's about your size." "Mr. Everett has a sister?" Eliza asked, sitting up and accepting the tray gratefully. "Yes, Mrs. Charlotte Wilson. She lives in Denver with her husband and children, visits once a year or so, Mrs. Abernathy laid the clothes at the foot of the bed. "Mr. Everett asked if you'd join him in his study when you're ready. No rush," she added with a kind smile. After eating and dressing in a simple blue calico dress that fit surprisingly well, Eliza made her way downstairs. The house was quiet except for the distant sounds of activity from the direction of the barn. She found the study easily enough, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk near the window. Darius stood when she entered, setting aside the ledger he'd been examining. "Miss Jenkins." "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." She remained near the doorway, uncertain. "Please sit down." He indicated a comfortable chair across from his desk. "I thought we should discuss your situation and options." Eliza sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. "My situation is fairly straightforward, Mr. Everett. I have no family, no money, and no prospects. My options, I suspect, are limited." The bluntness of her assessment seemed to surprise him. "That may be true at the moment," he said carefully, "but it doesn't have to remain so." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Tell me, Miss Jenkins, what were your plans before everything changed?" "I was to be a teacher at a school in Sacramento. I had corresponded with the school board and accepted the position. They were expecting me by the end of summer." "Do you have any proof of this arrangement? Letters, documents?" Eliza shook her head. "Everything I owned was in my trunk on the wagon. I have nothing but the clothes Mrs. Abernathy provided." Darius frowned thoughtfully. "We could write to the school, explain what happened. They might still honor the position if they haven't filled it." The kindness of this suggestion caught Eliza off guard. "Why would you help me this way? You've already done more than enough by." She trailed off, unsure how to refer to his purchase of her without sounding crude. "By buying you." He supplied the words with surprising frankness. "Miss Jenkins, I didn't buy you. I paid to free you from a situation no decent person should ever find themselves in." But $100 is a considerable sum, Eliza pointed out. Surely you expect something in return. His expression hardened slightly. I expect nothing from you except honesty. What happened yesterday was wrong on every level and I couldn't stand by and watch. That's all there was to it. Eliza wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that men rarely did anything without expecting something in return, especially for a young woman alone in the world. As if reading her thoughts, Darius sighed. I understand your skepticism. In your position, I'd feel the same. So let me make a proposition. Stay here at the ranch until we can contact the school in Sacramento. If they still want you, I'll personally see that you get there safely. If not, you're welcome to remain here as long as you need to decide what you want to do next. And in the meantime. Eliza asked, what would I do here? Whatever you're comfortable with. Mrs. Abernathy could use help with the house. Or, given your training as a teacher, perhaps you could help with the record keeping for the ranch. Several of my ranch hands have children who aren't getting much in the way of education out here. The idea of teaching again, even informally, lifted Eliza's spirits. I would be happy to teach the children. Good. Darius smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face, creating small creases at the corners of his eyes. That's settled then. You stay as our guest and teacher until we hear from Sacramento, and if they no longer want me, then we'll find another solution. The territory has a shortage of educated women willing to brave the frontier. Your skills won't go to waste. It was a fair offer, more than fair, considering her circumstances. Yet Eliza couldn't help feeling that she was missing something important about Darius Everett and his motivations. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Everett? She asked directly. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze shifting to the window where the mountains rose in the distance. 10 years ago, he finally said, my younger sister ran away from home after an argument with our father. She was 17, headstrong, and convinced she could make her own way in the world. His voice grew tight. She ended up in a situation not unlike yours. By the time I found her, 6 months later, she had endured things no woman should ever have to experience. Eliza's heart constricted with understanding. I'm very sorry. Charlotte survived. She's stronger than anyone I've ever known. She married a good man, has children, a life she loves. He turned back to Eliza, his eyes intense. But I swore that, if I ever had the chance to prevent another woman from suffering as she did, I would take it. That's all this is, Miss Jenkins, keeping a promise I made to myself. The sincerity in his voice convinced Eliza more than anything else could have. She nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Everett, and for your kindness. I accept your proposition. Excellent. He stood, indicating their discussion was concluded. Mrs. Abernathy can show you around the property when you're ready. I need to check on the herd in the north pasture, but I'll return for supper. As Darius turned to leave, Eliza called after him. Mr. Everett, he paused at the doorway, your sister was fortunate to have a brother like you. A shadow of something pain, perhaps, or regret crossed his face. I should have found her sooner. With that, he left, his footsteps fading down the hallway. The days that followed fell into a surprising rhythm. Mrs. Abernathy showed Eliza around the ranch, the main house with its 6 bedrooms, study, dining room, and spacious kitchen. The bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the barn and stables, the chicken coop and vegetable garden, and the small cabin where Mrs. Abernathy herself resided. Eliza met the ranch hands gradually, a diverse group of men who treated her with a respect that seemed to stem from their loyalty to Darius. Among them were 2 married men whose wives and children lived in simple cabins beyond the bunkhouse. Between them, there were 5 children ranging in age from 4 to 12. On her 3rd day at the ranch, Eliza began teaching these children in the shade of a large cottonwood tree near the creek. She had no books or slates, but Mrs. Abernathy provided paper and pencils, and Darius offered the use of any books from his extensive library. To Eliza's delight, the children were eager to learn. Even the oldest boy, 12-year-old Timothy, who had initially scoffed at the idea of schooling, became engaged when Eliza incorporated practical mathematics using examples from ranch life, calculating cattle values, measuring distances, and estimating supplies. In the evenings, after the children returned to their cabins, Eliza would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Sometimes Darius would join her, and they would talk about books, the changing seasons, or life in the territory. He never mentioned her past or the circumstances of their meeting, for which she was grateful. A week after her arrival, as they sat on the porch watching bats dart across the twilight sky, Darius handed her an envelope. "I wrote to the school board in Sacramento," he said. "This will go out with the supply wagon tomorrow." Eliza took the envelope, touched by his effort. "Thank you, I hope they respond quickly." "The mail can be slow out here," he warned. "It might be a month or more before we hear anything." A month. The thought of staying at Everett Ranch for so long both comforted and unsettled her. She was beginning to feel at home here, and that was dangerous. This arrangement was temporary, a fact she needed to remember. "In the meantime," Darius continued, "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to join me on a trip to town this weekend. We need supplies and—" He hesitated. "There's a small social gathering Saturday night. Nothing fancy, just the local ranchers and townspeople getting together for music and dancing at the community hall. Mrs. Abernathy thought you might enjoy it." Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of facing strangers, of potentially encountering anyone who had been at that auction, made her stomach clench with anxiety. Seeing her expression, Darius quickly added, "We're not going to Diablo Springs, that's the town where we met. We'll be going to Cedar Creek. It's larger, more civilized. No one there will know anything about what happened to you." Relief washed over her. "In that case, yes, I would like to go. It's been a long time since I've done anything normal." Darius smiled, that transformative expression that Eliza found herself looking forward to more and more. "Good. We'll leave Saturday morning and stay overnight at the hotel. It's not much, but it's clean." Saturday dawned clear and cool, with the promise of heat later in the day. Eliza dressed in her best outfit, a dark green dress that Mrs. Abernathy had altered to fit her perfectly, and packed a small bag with essentials for the overnight stay. They set out just after breakfast, traveling in Darius's wagon rather than on horseback. The journey to Cedar Creek took most of the day, with a stop for lunch beside a stream where cottonwoods provided welcome shade. As they ate the sandwiches Mrs. Abernathy had packed, Eliza found herself studying Darius when he wasn't looking. In the weeks since her arrival at the ranch, she had grown increasingly aware of him not just as her benefactor, but as a man. The way the sun highlighted the planes of his face, the strength in his hands as he handled the wagon reins, the rare but genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, these details had begun to occupy more of her thoughts than she cared to admit. "What made you decide to become a rancher?" she asked, partly to distract herself from these unsettling observations. Darius considered the question while finishing his sandwich. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri, smaller than this place, just enough to feed our family with a little left over to sell. I always knew I wanted more land, more freedom. After the war, I headed west, worked as a cowhand for a few years, saved every penny. When this land came up for sale, I took a chance." "You fought in the war?" Eliza asked, surprised. He would have been very young. "Last 2 years. I was 17 when I enlisted with the Union Army." His expression closed slightly, and Eliza sensed he didn't wish to elaborate further on that chapter of his life. "And your parents, are they still in Missouri?" "My father passed 6 years ago. Mother lives with my sister in Denver now." He began packing up their lunch things. "We should get going if we want to reach town before dark." Cedar Creek proved to be a substantial settlement compared to the rough outpost where Eliza had been auctioned. It boasted proper streets laid out in a grid, a variety of businesses, a church with a tall white steeple, and houses that looked permanently established rather than hastily constructed. The hotel was indeed modest but clean, as Darius had promised. He secured 2 rooms, one for Eliza and one for himself, and arranged to meet her in the lobby in 2 hours, after they had both rested and refreshed themselves. Alone in her room, Eliza washed away the dust from their journey and changed into the dress she had brought for the social gathering. It was a simple blue cotton dress, but with its fitted bodice and full skirt, it was the most feminine thing she had worn since before the wagon train attack. As she pinned up her hair, leaving a few curls to frame her face, Eliza admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She wanted to look pretty for Darius. The realization made her cheeks flush. It was foolish to develop feelings for the man who had rescued her, a classic case of a grateful damsel confusing gratitude with deeper emotions. Yet as she descended the stairs to the lobby and saw Darius waiting for her, dressed in a clean black suit with a crisp white shirt, her heart performed a traitorous little flip in her chest. He looked up at her approach, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "Miss Jenkins," he finally said, "you look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, hoping her blush wasn't too obvious. "And please, after all this time, I think you could call me Eliza." His smile was slow and warm. "Only if you'll call me Darius." The social gathering was held in a large hall on the edge of town. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over the wooden floor where couples were already dancing to the music provided by a small band fiddle, guitar, and piano. Along one wall, tables were laden with food and drink brought by the attendees. "Would you like some punch?" Darius asked as they entered. "Yes, please," Eliza replied, taking in the scene with a mixture of pleasure and trepidation. It had been so long since she had been in a normal social setting that it felt almost foreign. As Darius went to fetch their drinks, a woman about Eliza's age approached her. She had warm brown eyes and a friendly smile. "You must be new in town," she said. "I'm Margaret Thornton. My husband and I run the general store." "Eliza Jenkins," she replied, relieved at the woman's welcoming manner. "I'm staying at Everett Ranch, helping with the children there." "Darius Everett's ranch?" Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, that's interesting. Darius rarely brings anyone to these gatherings. Usually comes alone, stays for an hour, then disappears back to that ranch of his." Before Eliza could respond, Darius returned with 2 cups of punch. "Mrs. Thornton," he greeted Margaret with a polite nod. "I see you've met Miss Jenkins." "Indeed I have," Margaret replied with a knowing smile. "I was just telling her how rare it is to see you with a companion at these events. If the comment made Darius uncomfortable, he didn't show it. Miss Jenkins is teaching the children at the ranch." "I thought she deserved a night of entertainment after dealing with Timothy Miller's reluctance to learn his letters." Margaret laughed. "That boy is as stubborn as his father. Well, I should get back to George before he eats all the apple pie. Miss Jenkins, it was a pleasure. I hope you'll visit our store while you're in town." As she walked away, Eliza turned to Darius. "She seems nice." "The Thorntons are good people," he agreed. "Been here since before I arrived." The band struck up a lively tune and several couples moved to the center of the floor. "Would you care to dance?" Darius asked, setting their empty cups aside. Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." His hand was warm and steady as he led her to the dance floor. When he placed his other hand at her waist and drew her into the proper position for a waltz, Eliza was acutely aware of how long it had been since she had been this close to a man, and how different it felt to be touched with respect rather than as property. Darius was a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent most of his days on horseback or working with cattle. He led her confidently through the steps, maintaining a proper distance between them while still managing to make her feel secure in his arms. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked as they moved around the floor. A hint of a smile played at his lips. "My mother insisted all her children learn proper social graces, even though we lived on a farm miles from anywhere." She hired a dancing instructor from the nearest town to come once a week. The image of a young Darius reluctantly practicing dance steps made Eliza laugh. "I'm sure you were thrilled about that." "About as thrilled as Timothy is about his arithmetic lessons," he confirmed with a chuckle. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break to sample the food at the tables. Several people stopped to greet Darius, and he introduced Eliza each time simply as Miss Jenkins, who's teaching at the ranch. If anyone wondered about the nature of their relationship, they were too polite to ask directly. Later in the evening, the band played a slow, melancholy tune that Eliza recognized as one her father used to whistle while working in his study. A wave of nostalgia washed over her. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" Darius asked, noticing her sudden change in mood. She nodded gratefully, and he led her through the side door onto a small porch that overlooked a creek running behind the hall. The night air was cool and fragrant with the scent of pines from the nearby hills. Stars crowded the sky, more than Eliza had ever seen in the city. "That song reminded me of my father," she explained without prompting. "He used to whistle it while he worked on his sermons." "Your father was a minister?" Darius asked, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "Yes, in St. Louis, a small congregation but devoted. When he and my mother died, the church couldn't afford to keep me on as the schoolteacher. Too many families had left during the epidemic." She sighed, the memory still painful. "That's why I accepted the position in California. It was that or become a burden on friends who were already struggling." Darius was quiet for a moment, his face thoughtful in the silver light of the moon. "You're very brave, Eliza," he finally said. "To set out alone across the country, to start over after losing everything that takes courage." She shook her head. "It wasn't courage, it was necessity." "Sometimes they're the same thing." He turned to face her fully. "The bravest acts I've witnessed weren't done for glory or recognition. They were done because there was no other choice." The intensity in his gaze made Eliza's breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might lean in closer, might even kiss her. Part of her, a larger part than she cared to admit, hoped he would. Instead, he straightened and stepped back slightly. "We should probably head back inside. It's getting late and we have a long ride tomorrow." Eliza nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Yes, of course." They returned to the dance floor for one last dance before bidding the Thorntons and the other townspeople goodnight and walking back to the hotel. At the door to her room, Darius paused. "Thank you for coming tonight, Eliza. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed an evening so much." "Thank you for inviting me," she replied. It felt good to be normal again. He smiled, that warm expression that transformed his entire face. "Good night, then. I'll meet you for breakfast at 7. "Good night, Darius." As she prepared for bed, Eliza tried to make sense of her conflicted feelings. She was attracted to Darius, there was no point in denying that anymore. But her future was uncertain. Any day now, they might receive a response from the school in Sacramento, and she would be on her way to California as planned. Allowing herself to develop deeper feelings for him would only lead to heartache. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was his face she saw in her mind's eye, those storm-gray eyes watching her with an intensity that made her feel both vulnerable and protected. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast at the hotel's dining room, they set out for the return journey to the ranch. Before leaving town, they stopped at the general store where Margaret Thornton greeted them warmly and helped them gather the supplies they needed. As Margaret was wrapping a bolt of fabric that Mrs. Abernathy had requested, she leaned closer to Eliza. "It's nice to see Darius with someone," she said in a low voice. "He's been alone too long." "Oh, we're not, I'm just staying at the ranch temporarily," Eliza explained hastily. Margaret gave her a knowing smile. "Of course. Still, he looks happier than I've seen him in years." Before Eliza could respond, Darius returned from loading the other purchases into the wagon. "Ready to go?" he asked. The journey back to the ranch was pleasant, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that kept the worst of the heat at bay. They talked easily about books they had read, places they had seen, and the children's progress with their studies. By unspoken agreement, neither mentioned the school in Sacramento or the possibility of Eliza leaving. They arrived at the ranch in late afternoon to find everything in order. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a cold supper for them, knowing they would be tired from the journey. After they had eaten and the supplies had been unloaded and stored, Eliza found herself once again sitting on the porch with Darius, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Thank you again for taking me to town," she said. "It was a wonderful change of pace. I'm glad you enjoyed it." He seemed about to say more when the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Sam, rode into the yard at a gallop. Seeing Darius on the porch, he reined in his horse sharply. "Mr. Everett," he called, his voice urgent, "riders coming from the east. Looks like trouble." Darius was on his feet instantly. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. They're armed and they ain't moving like men with honest business." "Get the other men," Darius ordered, "and make sure the women and children stay in their cabins." He turned to Eliza. "Go inside and stay there. Lock the doors." The calm authority in his voice brooked no argument. Eliza hurried into the house, her heart racing. Through the window, she watched as Darius strode to the gun rack near the door, took down a rifle and checked that it was loaded. "What's happening?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, entering from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. "Riders coming. Darius thinks it might be trouble." The housekeeper's face paled. "Lord have mercy, we'd better get away from the windows." They retreated to the kitchen at the back of the house, but Eliza couldn't stop herself from peeking through the small window that overlooked the yard. Darius and 4 of his ranch hands had positioned themselves near the barn, rifles ready but not yet raised. The riders appeared at the edge of the property, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Even from a distance, there was something menacing about their approach, too purposeful, too direct. As they drew nearer, Eliza's blood turned to ice. In the lead was the burly, bearded man who had bid against Darius at the auction in Diablo Springs. "Oh no," she whispered. "What is it?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, moving to stand beside her. "That man, the one in front. He was at the auction where he found me." The housekeeper's expression hardened. "Well, he's not welcome here. Mr. Everett will send him packing." The riders halted about 20 yards from where Darius and his men stood. Words were exchanged, though Eliza couldn't make out what was said. But the tension in Darius's posture told her everything she needed to know. Suddenly, the bearded man pointed toward the house and shouted something. Darius shook his head emphatically. More words were exchanged, voices rising in anger. "What do they want?" Mrs. Abernathy wondered aloud, but Eliza knew they wanted her. Somehow, the bearded man had discovered where she had been taken, and he had come to claim what he believed should have been his. Fear and guilt warred within her. She had brought this danger to Darius's door, to this place that had become a sanctuary, if anyone was hurt because of her. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Finally, the bearded man spat on the ground, yanked his horse around, and led his companions back the way they had come. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Darius lower his rifle and turn toward the house. Eliza met him at the door. "Was it about me?" She asked directly, though she already knew the answer. Darius's jaw was tight with anger. "Yes, that was Jasper Decker. He claims you were meant to be his, that there was some arrangement with the men who held the auction." "What did you tell him?" "That you're not property to be bought and sold, and that if he sets foot on my land again, he'll regret it." Darius set his rifle down with controlled care. "But he won't give up so easily. Men like Decker don't take kindly to being denied what they want." Fear clutched at Eliza's heart. "I should leave. I'm putting you and everyone here in danger." "No," Darius's response was immediate and firm. "Running won't solve anything. Decker would just follow you, and you'd be alone, vulnerable." His expression softened slightly. "Besides, this is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. Your home." The words touched something deep within Eliza, a longing for belonging that she had suppressed since her parents' deaths. But it was the conviction in Darius's voice, the unwavering certainty that she was worth protecting, that finally broke through the walls she had built around her heart. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate but unable to express the depth of her gratitude any other way. He nodded once, understanding in his eyes. "We'll need to be more vigilant for a while. No one goes anywhere alone. The children should stay close to the house during their lessons." "Of course." Eliza hesitated, then added, "Darius, I don't want anyone hurt because of me." "No one will be," he promised, though they both knew it wasn't a guarantee he could make. That night, Eliza lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, listening for any sound that might indicate Decker's return. Her mind raced with worry and guilt. The peace she had found at Everett Ranch now seemed fragile, threatened by the violence of her past. Yet beneath the fear was another emotion, one she was finally ready to acknowledge. She was falling in love with Darius Everett. Not out of gratitude or necessity, but because of the man he was honorable, kind, and stronger than anyone she had ever known. The thought of leaving him, of continuing to California if the school responded favorably, now filled her with a different kind of dread. The days that followed were tense. Darius increased the number of men watching the property, and everyone remained alert for signs of trouble. The children's lessons continued, but now took place in the dining room of the main house rather than under the cottonwood tree. A week after Decker's visit, a letter arrived from Sacramento. Eliza recognized the official seal of the school board and felt a mix of anticipation and dread as she opened it. The letter was polite but clear. Due to her prolonged absence and lack of communication, they had been forced to offer the teaching position to another candidate. They expressed regret for the circumstances that had delayed her journey and wished her well in her future endeavors. Eliza read the letter twice, waiting for the disappointment to hit her. Instead, she felt a surprising sense of relief. The decision had been made for her. She didn't have to choose between the life she had planned and the one she was beginning to build here. She found Darius in the corral, working with a young horse that was new to the saddle. She waited until he had finished the training session before approaching the fence. "I received a letter from the school board," she said when he joined her, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. His expression was carefully neutral. "And they've given the position to someone else." "I'm sorry, Eliza. I know how much that opportunity meant to you." She shook her head slowly. "The strange thing is, I'm not upset, not really. It was a plan born of necessity, not passion." She looked around at the ranch, the mountains beyond, then back to Darius. "I've found something here that I didn't expect." The hope that flickered in his eyes made her heart race. "What's that?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, one of the ranch hands called from the direction of the bunkhouse. "Mr. Everett, riders coming fast from the south." The moment was shattered. Darius turned sharply, his hand automatically reaching for the gun belt he had hung on the corral post. "Get to the house, Eliza, now." This time there was no standoff. Jasper Decker and his men rode hard into the yard, guns already drawn. Two of Darius's men fell in the first volley of shots, though Eliza couldn't tell if they were dead or merely wounded. She ran for the house, heart pounding in her ears, but she was only halfway there when rough hands seized her from behind. She screamed and fought, but her captor was too strong. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of Darius engaged in a brutal fistfight with Decker, both men bloody and dirt-streaked. "Darius," she cried out as her captor dragged her toward the horses. Her voice distracted him just long enough for Decker to land a powerful blow to his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. Decker stood over him, drawing his pistol with deliberate slowness. "No." Eliza's scream tore from her throat as she redoubled her efforts to break free. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Mrs. Abernathy appeared on the porch with a shotgun, firing a warning shot into the air. At the same moment, one of the ranch hands tackled the man holding Eliza, freeing her from his grip. She stumbled forward, driven by blind terror and the desperate need to reach Darius. Decker turned at the sound of the shotgun, his pistol swinging toward the new threat. In that instant of distraction, Darius lunged upward, driving his shoulder into Decker's midsection and sending them both crashing to the ground, the pistol discharged with a deafening crack. For a horrible moment, Eliza thought Darius had been shot. But it was Decker who lay motionless, the bullet having found his own chest in the struggle. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fallen, lost their nerve. They retreated hastily, leaving their wounded behind. In the sudden silence that followed, Eliza rushed to Darius's side. He was on his knees beside Decker's body, breathing heavily, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Are you hurt?" she asked frantically, her hands moving over his shoulders and chest, searching for wounds. "I'm all right," he assured her, his voice rough. "Just some cuts and bruises." He caught her hands in his, stilling their frantic movements. "Eliza, are you injured?" She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. No, I'm fine." The aftermath of the attack was chaotic but controlled. The sheriff from Cedar Creek arrived with deputies, summoned by a ranch hand who had ridden for help as soon as the shooting started. Statements were taken, bodies removed, and wounds tended. 2 of Darius's men had been injured, one with a bullet grazed to the arm, the other with a more serious wound to the shoulder, but thankfully, no one from the ranch had been killed. One of Decker's men had died alongside his leader, the others were now in custody. It was late evening by the time the sheriff and his deputies departed, taking the prisoners with them. The ranch was quiet, an uneasy peace settling over the buildings and corrals that had so recently been the scene of violence. Eliza found Darius sitting alone on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the darkened landscape. His face was bruised, a bandage covering the cut above his eye. He looked exhausted but vigilant, as if he expected another attack at any moment. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He glanced up, some of the tension leaving his shoulders at the sight of her. "Of course." She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the occasional whinny from the horses in the barn, the distant howl of a coyote. "I killed a man today," Darius finally said, his voice low. "Not the first time, but it never gets easier, nor should it." "It was self-defense," Eliza reminded him. "He would have killed you, and then me, or worse." Darius nodded slowly. "I know, still, taking a life, it leaves a mark on your soul." She reached out and placed her hand over his, feeling the roughness of his skin, the strength in his fingers. "You saved my life, Darius, not just today, but the day you found me in that town. You gave me back my dignity, my future." He turned his hand beneath hers, linking their fingers together. "You don't owe me anything, Eliza, I hope you know that." "I do." She met his gaze steadily. "What I feel for you isn't gratitude, or at least not just gratitude." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or uncertainty. "What are you saying?" Eliza took a deep breath, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Darius Everett. Not because you rescued me, but because of who you are, your kindness, your honor, your strength. I love the way you treat your men with respect and fairness. I love how you listen when the children read their lessons, even when you're tired from working all day. I love your smile, which doesn't appear often enough, but when it does, it changes your whole face." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "I understand if you don't feel the same way. I know this is complicated. With my situation and everything that's happened," Darius silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "Eliza," he said softly, "I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, holding your head high despite everything that had been done to you. Your courage, your resilience, your kindness despite the cruelty you've experienced, how could I not love you for that?" Joy bloomed in Eliza's heart, bright and unexpected. Truly, in answer, Darius leaned forward and kissed her, his lips gentle against hers. It was a tentative kiss at first, as if he feared she might pull away. But when she responded, her hand rising to cup his cheek, he deepened the kiss, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, breathless, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Cedar Creek," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" "I wasn't sure if it was what you wanted, if you were ready, if you might still be planning to leave for California." Eliza smiled, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm not going anywhere. This is where I belong, here with you." The months that followed were filled with healing and growth. The ranch flourished under Darius's careful management, and Eliza's small school expanded to include children from neighboring ranches who came 3 days a week for lessons. Word of what had happened with Jasper Decker spread through the territory, and for a time, Eliza worried that her past would follow her, that others might come looking for the woman who had been auctioned off in Diablo Springs. But as summer turned to fall and fall to winter, it became clear that the danger had passed. On a crisp December evening, with snow dusting the distant mountains and a fire crackling in the hearth, Darius asked Eliza to marry him. They were sitting in the study, as they often did in the evenings, she reading while he went over the ranch accounts. "I don't have a ring yet," he said apologetically after she had accepted his proposal with tears and kisses. "I wanted to take you to Denver to choose one yourself. Perhaps in the spring when the weather is better for traveling." "I don't need a ring," Eliza assured him, though the thought of visiting the city was exciting. "I just need you." They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the small church in Cedar Creek. Mrs. Abernathy wept openly during the ceremony, and the ranch hands cheered when Darius kissed his bride. Margaret Thornton had helped Eliza find a suitable wedding dress, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. The celebration afterward was lively, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. Darius surprised everyone, including Eliza, by playing the fiddle for several songs, a talent he had kept hidden until then. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Everett," Eliza teased as they danced to a tune played by one of the ranch hands who had taken over the fiddle. "I hope to keep surprising you for many years to come, Mrs. Everett," he replied, his arm tightening around her waist. Mrs. Everett. The name still felt new and wonderful, a symbol of the life she had found when she least expected it. That spring, as promised, they traveled to Denver. The city was a whirlwind of activity and noise after the peaceful ranch, but Eliza enjoyed every moment. They visited Darius's sister Charlotte, who welcomed Eliza warmly into the family. The resemblance between brother and sister was striking, the same storm-gray eyes, the same quiet strength. "He's different with you," Charlotte told Eliza one afternoon as they watched Darius playing with her children in the garden. "Happier, more at peace with himself." "He saved my life," Eliza said simply. Charlotte smiled. "And you saved his in a different way. He carried so much guilt for so long about me, about the war, about the men he couldn't protect. You've helped him let some of that go." The years passed, bringing changes both great and small. The ranch prospered, allowing Darius to build a proper schoolhouse for Eliza's growing number of students. They had children of their own, twin boys born in the winter of 1877, and a daughter 3 years later. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on the porch as they had in the early days, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Sometimes they would talk about the past, about the auction block where they had first met, about Decker's attack, about the letter from Sacramento that had changed the course of Eliza's life. But more often they would speak of the future, of their children's education, of improvements to the ranch, of the changing territory around them. And sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, her hand in his, content in the knowledge that they had found in each other something rare and precious, a love born of the unlikeliest circumstances, tempered by danger and sacrifice, and stronger for the trials it had endured. One evening, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Eliza leaned her head against Darius's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out," she asked, "if you hadn't been in that town on that particular day?" Darius was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I believe some things are meant to be," he finally said. "Not in a way that excuses the evil men do, but in a way that gives meaning to the choices we make in response to that evil." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "I was meant to find you, Eliza, and you were meant to find me," she smiled, lifting her face for his kiss. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "I believe that too." In the years that followed, whenever someone asked how they had met, Darius would simply say that he had found Eliza out west during his travels. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. The important part of their story wasn't how it had begun, but how they had written it together, day by day, choice by choice, creating a life of love and purpose from the ashes of suffering and loss. And on the rare occasions when nightmares of the past would wake Eliza in the darkness, Darius would hold her close and whisper the words that had first given her hope on that terrible day so long ago. "You'll rest now, you're safe, you're home." And she was.